All right. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, wherever you're joining from. It's a pleasure to be hosting this webinar today. Today, I'll be talking about fixing common metadata API errors for more successful Salesforce deployments. My name is Valerio Chang. I'm part of the customer success team here at Gearset. And I spent my days speaking to people like you who are Salesforce customers from Fortune 500 companies to small startups and everybody in between. And together with my team, we talk to users like you to understand your problems and find ways to help you resolve them every day. So we also get asked questions on how to adopt Salesforce DevOps workflows and to manage user releases. So if those are any of the topics that you want to ask us about, you're more than welcome to contact us. All right. So just to go over what we'll cover in the course of the webinar today. So today, my plan is to sort of outline the problem that we have, the problem that we're trying to address. Then I'll go into explaining who we are and what Gearset does. I'll touch on the different areas that Gearset can help you with in terms of release management. And one of those areas would be metadata deployments. So from there, we will drill into the specific unique selling point of Gearset when talking about metadata deployments. And that'll be our problem analyzers. And I'll show you how the intelligence that Gearset brings to your metadata deployments works. And I've chosen 5 examples to show you specifically to give you a flavor of how they work and execute some live here on the webinar to give you an idea of what you can expect. At the end, I'll also touch on the way that Gearset specifically helps with regards to integrating your source control so Git, for example, in your workflow. And I'll leave some time at the end for questions and stick around if anybody wants to have a chat. So if that all sounds okay, here we go. What is the problem that we're trying to talk about today? And the main thing is that deploying changes from one org to another one in Salesforce is difficult. It's very difficult. So any of you that have been using Gearset, Ant, or the SFDX CLI will likely to have encountered this firsthand. It's so easy to miss dependencies, to add in deprecated metadata that are no longer valid in the target, or otherwise just build deployment packages that fail the deployment. In fact, we know that deployments made via the Metadata API using tools like the Force.com migration tools, Gearset, or the DXCLI have a success rate about 50%. And we know this because we track this. When we started building Gearset, we used the same tools as Ant and the DXCLI to handle our deployments. And we have the data all the way back from 2014, 2015, when we started working on Gearset to track this deployment success rate. And every time it failed, the deployment, we would have to iterate and add in things, remove things, just to get to the place where we wanted to, where it succeeded. And this is problematic because it's repetitive, it's time consuming, and it requires you to become an expert in the intricacies of the dependencies of Salesforce metadata. And basically, this is frustrating. We quickly saw that this is a problem, and we spend our time and effort into making a tool that's better than what's on the market at solving this fundamentally tricky problem, the problem of making Salesforce deployments just work. So here is the graph that I was talking about, the deployment success rate. Each point on the graph, it represents a month in the past 5 years that Gearset has been around. And we start around here at the very left-hand side at about 37%, which means out of 100 deployments, 70, 60% of deployments fail. And we try to improve this, basically. So nowadays, we have been able to consistently help users to reach a successful deployment 9 out of 10 times when they deploy. And this is the core of what Gearset does. So how does Gearset treat metadata and what does Gearset do? We like to position ourselves as the modern DevOps tool for Salesforce. At the core, we help teams compare, move, and track changes between Salesforce environments faster and more easily than ever before. We're trying to target admins, developers, and release managers to, one, rapidly compare environments to see differences, two, quickly build deployment packages in order to synchronize orgs, and three, to help you reduce the risk of errors with rollbacks and metadata backups. And so fundamentally at the core, we compare your metadata and allow you to deploy it. But we don't just compare, we try to understand that metadata. And today I'm going to show you what we mean by understand. We will show this by the way that our problem analyzers are presented to you. And these problem analyzers that we're going to talk about today have in the past 5 years run 5.5 billion times and help deployment succeed. So just as a side note, we're going to talk mainly about metadata today, but not only does Gearset do metadata deployments, we have a whole suite of tools to help with your Salesforce DevOps. So metadata deployments being one of the earliest features we made available, but we can also help you with your continuous integration, basically to automate that process of deploying from an org to another and potentially integrate source control into that. We also help you back up and track the changes in metadata. Additionally, we can help with making data records go from one org to another. So this is sort of in the context of sandbox seeding, or if you're migrating CPQ, which a lot of CPQ records are data rather than metadata. And very recently, last year, we launched the data backup tool, so to allow you to back up and restore data records in the case of a disaster recovery. So I'm more than happy to walk through any of these features with you guys, but today I'm mainly going to focus on the metadata deployment part. So to migrate metadata, we do three things. First, we compare, then we build a package, and then we deploy. And I'm going to show you how this works. So I'm going to switch over to our app here for my presentation. So our app is accessed via our website. So anybody without installing anything can go to the website, and then we'll log into the app, and I'll just do a quick demonstration of how Gearset deals with deployments. So you can see now that I've logged in, basically we'll be presented with a choice of a source and target. So in this case, my source is my dev org, Valerio-Lightning, and my target is the staging org. So after selecting my source and target, I run a comparison. And this comparison, not only is it trying to retrieve the metadata from your source and target and presenting to you, as you will see, we also are trying to understand the parent-child relationship, any dependencies, and any big components. For example, custom object, we split them out into individually deployable parts. So you'll see custom fields separate from list views, separate from validation rules. Okay, now we reach the comparison results screen. So that was our first step, compare the two orgs. What you're seeing here is a list of changes between the source and target. And if I go through them, you can see between the source and target, between the right-hand side and the left-hand side, the exact differences that your source and target have. So for example, here, I might have a custom field that have a different length between my source and target. So I very easily know what differences I have. And if I select those changes that I want to migrate to my target, that's my step 2. I select the changes, and then I go and build a deployment package. So here we're going to get a list of components that we're going to be deploying to our target. So that, in summary, is this 3-step process of migrating metadata. And today we're going to focus on specifically between step 2 and step 3. In this step here, we're going to introduce the concept of problem analyzers. And this is what builds the intelligence to help you create the package that you want. So what are problem analyzers? Problem analyzers are built with the single purpose to make your deployments more likely to succeed. Each problem analyzer will look for a specific issue, and we'll go through 5 of these examples and suggest ways to help you fix that issue. So whether it's adding it or removing it, or making changes to the metadata that you're deploying. And it's worthwhile noting that this doesn't just apply when you run a comparison manually. All these problem analyzers apply when you have continuous integration set up. So every automated job we will apply the same problem analyzers to them. So let me, oh yeah, another thing is I often get asked about how Gearset compares us to its competition on the market and what's the unique selling point. While my number one answer is always our customer-focused support. So we do this via web chats, we get on screen shares with people. But second, I would always point out that Gearset really understands your metadata and applies this intelligence that I don't think I've seen other tools do. So let's take a look at problem analyzers. What do they help with? So to date, we have about 55 different analyzers, all targeting different issues. And you can see here 4 major categories that we try to help with. So whether it's a missing dependency, creating a deployment that's not valid, or detecting various problems with the API version being different. Or there might be some quirks, let's say, that Salesforce has in their API, and we try to help address those. And then we have things that address specific user references. So, for example, every org will have specific users, and they're unique. So if I have a username Valerio at gearset.com in one org, I can't have another username in another org with that. So we'll see how that's addressed. So let's take a look at some examples here. All right, I'm going to go back into my comparison that we ran. I'm going to just hop back to comparison, and we'll walk through some of these examples. Let me unselect the ones that we did before. And so we looked at things that are different between the source and target when I did the first kind of walkthrough. Notice that here we have anything that's new. So things that only exist in the source, but not in the target. And these will be the new items usually that you develop in your develop org. So let's take a look at this example of a discount percentage field. I've got a field here, a custom field as part of the count object. And if I take a look at the formula here, I can see that it's dependent on another field, this field called discount rate. You can see this discount rate as a separate field here. And remember when I said that Gearset understands this metadata? If I look and drill into my depends on field for discount percentage, I can quickly see that Gearset, the application, understands that the discount rate is a dependency of discount percentage. Now imagine if I select just the discount percentage and deploy, and pretend I just forgot to select discount rate. I'll ignore this step. This step is the problem analyzer telling you what to add or remove. But if we do that, if I don't listen to Gearset and the suggestion that we have there, here we have a deployment summary. I'm going to only deploy my discount percentage. And if I go ahead and validate, I hope, Salesforce here will fail the validation because one of the dependencies is missing. And you will get this error, field discount rate does not exist. So without Gearset, you then have to go back into your source org, find out what that means, why it's a dependency, and add that back in. However, if you were using Gearset, what you would do is you would go back to the results and then trigger the problem analyzer. And the problem analyzer will tell you what's wrong. So let's take a look here. It says some items reference components that aren't in the target. And here it gives you a solution. Let's add those components into your package to help you succeed. So I add those in. Now my deployment package will contain the discount rate as well. And if you check here in the deployment summary, we actually explicitly point out to you things that you've selected versus things that are added by the problem analyzer. So if I go ahead and validate that deployment, it should all go through. And this is just kind of how Gearset helps you make successful deployments, really by you just clicking through. I'm going to take a look at a second example here. So if we go back and forget about missing dependencies for a minute, I don't know if you have come across a situation where you're trying to change a field and you get an error message, something about their sharing model and the master detail relationship. So I can demonstrate this now. So here I have a field that's different between my source and target, the Gearset employee object, and the field called happy, which is the one I showed before about the different lengths. So if I select this and try to deploy it, Gearset here has a problem analyzer pointing out that there is a master detail field as part of this object that is missing. Again, if I do not accept this suggestion, the error message that you get is this. So yeah, I'll just wait for it to show up. And reading this error message cannot set sharing model to control by parent on a custom object really is just confusing. This error message is one that's given to us directly by Salesforce, and it doesn't really tell you what you need to do in order to make this work. It just says it cannot do this. It sort of hints at it, like without a master detail relationship field. In contrast, using the Gearset problem analyzer, we point out to you that the problem is that due to the way that the API works, we're making changes to an object with a master detail field. We need to include all the other fields. And there it is, that easy tick box. You go ahead and we add in by the problem analyzer all the other fields on the object, and your validation should succeed. Ta-da! Cool. So that's sort of working together with the Salesforce API's quirks in order to kind of overcome that. The third example I'm going to show you sort of builds on that. Let's see. So I've got here, I'm going to untick this example. So I've got here a record type. My record type is called commute. And I got several picklist values on this record type. So in fact, I can see that this record type commute depends on a custom field. And with the custom field, I can see that the cycle and the train option don't exist in the target. So if those of you familiar with the way the metadata works within Salesforce, if we choose to deploy a record type that has values that don't exist in the target, it won't be happy. It will throw you errors like this. So it will say that the target doesn't have these values and asks you, well, it will fail, and therefore Gearset here is asking you to remove those values so that your deployment succeeds. Notice that the previous problem analyzer is still applied here because Gearset employee is part of a master detail field. So let's ignore that one for now because we talked about it in the second example. But here, Gearset is actively helping you create a package. In this case, the package will only contain 3 valid values to help your deployment work. So in this case, if I select that and accept the suggestions, Gearset will bring in that in the deployment summary, and hopefully we'll just get a deployment that just works, so you don't have to worry about all the other dependencies. For the fourth example, let's take a look at some user references. So you might have come across this with workflows or report types or anything that references Salesforce user. So here is my workflow, and I can see in my workflow I am sending some emails, and the recipient here is different from the target. But I also know that this recipient only exists in the source. So if I was to deploy this email address to the target, um, Salesforce just won't be happy. It'll say this particular user does not exist in the target. And normally what Gearset does is deploy exactly what's in the source to the target. However, in this case, we've written a problem analyzer to pick up the fact that your user does not exist in the target. So let's see here. The change workflow alerts references a specific user and will fail if the recipient user doesn't exist in the target. So the solution here that Gearset proposes is let's use the value from the target and replace it in the package. So the package now, instead of your source user, will have your target user, and then that package is valid and doesn't fail when you deploy to your target org. So here you're deploying just the workflow alert. We've sort of edited that, so you're only deploying something that's been touched by the problem analyzer, and the validation will succeed. So again, normally Gearset doesn't try to change the metadata of your deployment, but in this case, it's the only sensible way to help you deploy that successfully. So as a final example here, I'm going to talk about the situation where the API changes. So currently we're on version 49, summer 20 of the API. However, you might have metadata from other orgs or other source control situations which are of a previous API. And just to show you a problem analyzer that takes into account those changes. So if you recall back in version 44, Salesforce has changed the API to change the way flows work. In fact, let's take a look at the flows here. I should point out that here I'm on the deleted tab. So the deleted stuff is stuff that's not existing in my source, does exist in my target. So I here have a flow that I can, I have let's say this field that I want to remove from my target. Gearset can help you do that. So normally change sets and other tools can't make destructive changes, but Gearset normally can, except for flows where the metadata API does not allow you to. So if I were to select these items for deletion, because of version 4, because we're on a version of the API after 44, these will fail because Salesforce has written validation rules in the target to not accept the deletion of flow definitions. Therefore, here Gearset is excluding them for you. And on the other hand, here we have a flow that's active in the target, and that deployment will also not work. This will only work after you deactivate or make inactive that flow in the target org. So here, Gearset is triggering these two different problem analyzers in order to remove them for your deployment package and to help your deployment be successful. So all the other things that you've selected in the comparison to create that package will work. So in this case, we're only going to be deleting one of the flows that is not inactive, that is inactive already in the target. So yeah, that's sort of 5 different examples of how. Oh, sorry, that's an error message. Well, okay, that's not going to work. But hopefully you can see how Gearset can help you kind of automate that process and take out things that you don't need and add things that you do need in order to get your deployment package successful. So here is a compilation of all the things that we talked about in the 5 examples. So with Gearset, you can turn a deployment that would have looked like this with all the errors and not really telling you why these errors exist into something like this, where, yeah, always happy. So with the problem analyzers, they automatically prompt you to make a better deployment package. And just note that this process isn't static. We're actively looking at deployment failures in our logs to pick out common reasons that our users' deployments fail. to create new analyzers to improve the process. So we have around 55 up to date, but that will grow. So if you see anything that is failing in your deployment and you think Gearset can write some logic to avoid that, we want to know, and we will improve that for you. And that will also improve the lives of everybody else using Gearset. Here, I would like to point out that Gearset has a very feedback-driven developing strategy. So we heavily listen to what you have to say. And coupled that with being able to release to the web app twice a day, so there are 2 releases, so we release features all the time, we can really react to what you suggest and really quickly deliver value to your release process. So up to now, we've been talking about org-to-org deployments between 2 different Salesforce org. What about workflows that include Git? So Git, as part of your version control, is something we would normally advocate, and we will help you adopt. So a typical flow would be adding version control between your 2 orgs. So committing your changes from your dev org into Git, and then tracking those changes, detecting any merge conflicts, and then doing another deployment from Git to your staging environment. So the problem analyzers that I talked about actually become even more valuable if you're using Git as part of the process. Because suddenly you have this Git repo in the middle, and this Git repo really doesn't validate anything. It doesn't care what you commit to it. It will happily say, okay, I'll take it. But the problem becomes if you deploy something invalid into your Git repo, you only find out when you deploy that Git branch into your next environment. So running problem analyzers when committing to Git, from the first part here, means that you catch things like missing dependencies at the time of committing. And this is the time when it's easiest to fix them. With most other tools, you're left fixing those failed deployments further down the pipeline when you're deploying, for example, into staging, or God forbid, if you're deploying to production. And imagine finding out a deployment error when you're deploying from Git to production or staging. You then have to go and find out, to go back into Git, to then find out which commit triggered it, added it into your Git repository, and what caused the issue. So having Gearset problem analyzers throughout really helps with that process. And being able to catch these issues early and fix them is so important, especially when you have multiple people merging into the same Git repo. Gearset allows your team to work together, apply the same logic and the same problem analyzers across the deployment pipeline to maintain a code base in your Git repository that is most likely to be valid at the point when you deploy at every stage in your workflow. So now that you know that Gearset problem analyzers apply org to Git, Git to org, there's another additional clever bit of logic that Gearset applies when you're deploying to Git. And here's another concept that I'm going to introduce here, which is the repository dependency cleaner. So the Gearset repository cleaner basically deletes from your Git repository any missing dependencies. Because if you had a missing dependency in your Git repo, that cannot then be successfully deployed to the next Salesforce org. So let's take a look at an example what this looks like. Imagine here you have an org, and you have an object and some associated profile permissions with that object. So you have an object permission, and you're committing this information into your Git branch. So now you have a starting point, a Git branch that resembles your org. Now imagine if you were to delete this object in your org. As you might know, when you do this in your Salesforce org, it will just automatically delete the object permissions and any dependencies for you. So at this point, Git hasn't deleted anything, but you've only deleted the object in your org. And if you push that change into your Git branch, you've deleted the object, but hey, your object permission is still in the Git branch. And now you have a floating object permission that doesn't reference anything. And just imagine what happens when you deploy that to the next environment. The target org will just say, hey, this doesn't work. I've got a permission with no object. However, the repo dependency cleaner takes care of that for you. anytime you execute a destructive change, we scan your Git repository when it's a target, and we remove any floating or missing dependency. So this doesn't just apply to object permission. This is like layout permissions, Apex class access. Um, so we're adding to that process when you're integrating Git within your workflow to help you keep a Git repository that is valid. So wrapping stuff up here, we sort of walk through what the problem is, i.e. deploying in Salesforce is difficult. We sort of went through a little demo of how Gearset works to help you solve that. We introduced the problem analyzers. We showed you 5 examples, and then we talked about some additional special things we do with Repo Dependency Cleaner. Now, some of this stuff you could script and write on your own. You can create a solution without Gearset. And no problem analyzer that I've shown you here in its own right is impossible to replicate, although I know some of them took us quite a long time to get right. But if you were to maintain that, if you were to do this yourself, you need to maintain a body of code just to keep your deployments working, and remember to keep applying those logic to your continuous integration jobs. So yeah, we're not just talking about deployments, we're talking about your whole CI pipeline. And this is why I think fundamentally, if you're deploying metadata, the solution is to have Gearset in it. We've built up 5 years worth of cumulative knowledge and experience with fixing deployments, which is why we have the 55 plus problem analyzers currently, and they're working automatically to fix deployments. And remember, we're adding to that all the time based on the errors we log and your product feedback. So in summary, the takeaway for you today is this. In the past 5 years, Gearset has been able to fix 5.5 billion problems before they hit the target. And this is across 3 million deployments, manual and automated. So I invite you to see for yourself, to see the deployments happening in real time. We've just built a website called trust.gearset.com. And it looks like this, which shows you live deployments as they are happening. And who knows, maybe you'll be interested to give it a go and try the problem analyzers out for yourself. Yeah, that sort of concludes my talk. And yeah, I'll hand back to Alice.